and Jordan with Desire Outwits Mother Nature.
I love to read. I have no interest in fiction. I only read nonfiction. And I only read books, at least the title, and as I flip through them in the bookstore. And I don't borrow books from libraries because you have to give them back. And I like to own books. I like to mark in the margins. This is, as my introduction said, one of the top 5 books in my library. It is also my favorite holiday tradition because I read this book once a year, every year, and I've done that for 43 years. Wherever I am in December, my goal is to finish it before the holiday season. I've selected a passage in chapter 2 of this book about dynamic desire. And I want to share it with you because I think it is relevant to what we are trying to accomplish in Toastmasters. Let's begin. There is a difference between wishing for something and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. The state of mind is belief, not mere hope or wish. Open-mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, and belief. Remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity, than is required to accept misery and poverty. A great poet correctly stated this universal truth through these lines. I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening as I counted my scanty store. For life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask. And once you have set the wages, then you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed that any wage I had asked for life would have surely paid. And then Hill shares with us at the end of this chapter a story about his son. And this story will help you understand the power of a dynamic desire. As a fitting climax to this chapter, I wish to introduce one of the most unusual persons I've ever known. I first saw him 24 years ago, a few minutes after he was born. He came into the world without any physical sign of years, and the doctor admitted, when pressed for an opinion, that the child might be deaf and mute for life. I challenged the doctor's opinion. I had the right to do so. I was the child's father. I too reached a decision, but I expressed the opinion silently in the secrecy of my own heart. I decided that my son would hear and speak. Nature could send me a child without ears, but nature could not induce me to accept the reality of that affair. In my own mind, I knew that my son would hear and speak. How? I was sure there must be a way, and I knew I would find it. I thought of the words of the immortal Emerson: the whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We need a next path. There is guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we should hear the right word. The right word? Desire. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. From that desire, I never receded, not for a second. Many years previously, I had written, "Our only limitations are those we set up in our own minds." For the first time, I wondered if that statement was true. Lying on the bed in front of me was a newly born child without the natural equipment of hearing. Even though he might hear and speak, he was obviously disfigured for life. Surely, this was a limitation which that child had not set up in his own mind. What could I do about it? Somehow, I would find a way to transplant into that child's mind my burning desire for ways and means of conveying sound to his brain without the aid of ears. As soon as the child was old enough to cooperate, I would fill his mind so completely with a burning desire to hear that nature would, by methods of her own, translate it into physical reality. As he grew older and began to take notice of things around him, we observed that he had a slight degree of hearing. When he reached the age when children usually begin talking, he never tried to speak. But we could tell by his actions that he could hear certain sounds slightly. That was all I wanted to know. I was convinced that if he could hear even slightly, he might develop still greater hearing capacity. Then something happened which gave me hope. It came from an entirely unexpected source. We bought a Victrola. When the child heard the music, he immediately appropriated the machine. He would stand and listen for hours, playing one record over and over again. His favorite record was the road, It's a Long Way to Tipperary. On one occasion, he played that piece over and over for almost 2 hours, standing in front of the Victrola with his teeth clamped on the edge of the case. The significance of that self-formed habit of his did not become clear to us until years afterward, for we had never heard of the principle of bone conduction of sound at the time. Shortly after he appropriated the Victrola, I discovered that he could hear me quite clearly when I spoke with my lips touching his mastoid bone or at the base of the brain. These discoveries placed in my possession the necessary media by which I would translate into reality my burning desire to help my son develop hearing and speech. By that time, he was making stabs at speaking certain words. The outlook was far from encouraging, but desire backed by faith knows no such word as impossible. Having determined that he would hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer to his mind the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories, so I went to work making up stories to convey this encouragement into his mind. Reason told me plainly that there was no adequate compensation for the lack of ears and natural hearing equipment. Desire backed by faith pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. As I analyzed the experience in retrospect, I can now see that my son's faith in me had much to do with the astounding results. He never questioned anything I told him. He trusted me completely. And whatever I spoke to him, he agreed with and tried to perform. It is interesting about this young man because his parents would never let him go to deaf school. They would never allow him to learn sign language. Now, of course, that got them into a lot of trouble with the school officials who thought that these special schools would be better for him and that the parents were particularly cruel, expecting this child to accomplish what medical science said was not even possible. We pick up the story when the child is a young man. And the following writes this. We could notice that gradually the child's hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self-conscious because of his affliction. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of servicing his mind was bearing fruit. For several months, he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness would make it unsafe for him to go on the street alone. Finally, he took matters in his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left at home with the servants, he climbed through the kitchen window, shin to the ground, and set out on his own. He borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighborhood shoemaker, invested it in papers, sold out, reinvested, and kept repeating until late in the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back the 6 cents he had borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents.